The most numerous of all U-boats was the Type 7. Small and cheap to build, the Type 7 was highly adaptable. Great many versions would enter service. It was fast on the surface and highly maneuverable. It was the workhorse of the U-boat fleet, accounting for over 60% of all U-boats that participated in the Second World War. This short video recaps the main U-boat types.
The first German submarines, or U-boats, were based on designs which bore a striking resemblance to the UB-2 type submarines introduced by the Germans near the end of the First World War. The Type 1A was a medium-sized boat of 600 tons, based on a submarine being built for Turkey. Only 2 were constructed, and they were relegated to training duties on the outbreak of hostilities. The Type 2A was a small coastal submarine. Although 6 were built, their part in the war was also very restricted, mainly due to their range of only just over 1,000 miles. The Types 2B, C and D were modifications of this design. Again, their relatively small size of about 300 tons limited their wartime activity considerably. The Battle of the Atlantic was fought by 2 main types of U-boat, the medium-range Type 7 and the long-range Type 9, with production concentrated on these 2. Both had been designed in the mid-1930s, yet were not surpassed until the latter stages of the war. The Type 7 had a displacement of some 700 tons, although later variants reached almost 1,000. They were 220 feet long and equipped with 5 21-inch torpedo tubes, 4 forward and 1 aft. Altogether, they carried 14 torpedoes, or mines. Using their diesel engines on the surface, they boasted a radius of action of some 6,500 miles, although the Type 7C-42 and other later versions could manage almost 10,000 miles. Submerged using batteries, the Type 7 could manage about 80 miles at 4 knots. They carried a crew of 44, and if necessary, could dive to about 650 feet. The Type 9 were somewhat larger, with earlier versions displacing just over 1,000 tons, growing to 1,600 tons with the Type 9D2. Early versions had a radius of over 8,000 miles, growing to 11,000 miles as the design evolved. They could carry up to 22 torpedoes or mines for their 6 torpedo tubes, 4 of which were in the bow and 2 located in the stern. They carried crews of about 55. Both classes could remain submerged for about 24 hours. After that, they would have to surface to recharge their batteries and replace the stale air inside the U-boat. Both types carried a deck gun armament, mainly for use against merchant ships, but later they were used more for self-defense when the submarines were caught on the surface by aircraft. As this possibility became increasingly common, more anti-aircraft guns were added. The larger gun carried on the foredeck was a 3.5-inch on the Type 7 or a 4-inch on the Type 9. A variety of 2 or 3 37mm and 20mm guns constituted the secondary armament. Later in the war, the larger gun was replaced on some boats by additional anti-aircraft guns. By limiting large-scale production of U-boats to the 2 main designs, the Germans found it difficult to improve performance, whereas British and American boats were constructed in classes built either for a specific purpose or to reflect technical advances. The relatively small size of most U-boats also limited how much additional equipment, like new communication systems or radars, could be fitted. Living conditions on both these classes were poor. The crew had to sleep wherever they could find space, which was often on top of the torpedoes. A crew had to share 1 toilet. The temperature could be very hot or freezing cold. Air conditioning was non-existent. With little room for food or water, rations were basic, and the crew often went for weeks or months without washing or shaving. After being underwater for hours, the air would become stale, and there was always the possibility of a slow, lingering death or of instantaneous destruction. But by 1943, it was becoming more obvious that these outdated designs would not be able to match new Allied anti-submarine warfare techniques. New concepts had to be found. The first of these was the schnorkel-fitted high-speed submarine with a much greater battery capacity, designed for continuous submerged patrols. Such submarines would be far less vulnerable to the long-range aircraft the Allies were now using to hunt for submarines on the surface. At the same time, the gun armament was to be sacrificed for a much more streamlined hull, with a resulting increase in speed. Over 12 knots could be maintained underwater, a substantial improvement on the 4 knots achieved by the earlier designs. Two types of submarine were to be built using these principles: the Type 21 for long-range deep-sea patrols, and the Type 23 for coastal duties. Their high underwater speeds could only be maintained for short periods before the batteries needed recharging. On the whole, German submarines were good conventional types, well fitted for their purpose, but the German Navy stayed with the early submarines for too long before incorporating radical technologies. By the time they became available, it was too late. The battle had been lost.